In this episode, we're going to tackle the age-old question, which is better, DC Comics or Marvel Comics?
This was a request from one of our subscribers, and we're finally getting around to doing it, so enjoy.
Sorry it took so long. Stay tuned! Welcome to My Side of the Laundry Room. My name's Rob.
And I'm Chris.
And like I said, we're going to tackle the age-old question that comic dorks have been discussing for ages. Which is better, DC Comics or Marvel Comics?
Which I think is all a matter of personal preference
It
to some
definitely
extent.
is.
And I think both of them have their golden years.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So I think to say as a whole which one's better is kind of tough.
Yes.
And it's also exposure.
It is. It is exposure. And in our discussion, let's try to not discuss the movies, because that can
Agreed.
skew the score dramatically.
Agreed.
Now, we've talked about comics we grew up with in the 80s a couple different times. Link will pop up over Chris's head right here. And part 2. Anyway, this is a topic that we've covered before, but have we ever said which is better? It's a very hard question, but there's a lot of people that think they have the answer.
Minus G.I. Joe, which I think we've talked about.
Yes.
Okay. Minus G.I. Joe, I predominantly read DC first.
Yes.
And as a result of G.I. Joe, I got into Marvel. And really the first Marvel title that I read that wasn't G.I. Joe was Alpha Flight.
Great
Which
comic.
which kind of leads you to the X-Men path, and then of course X-Men begots New Mutants and you know what I mean. You spiral
And
out of that. You know what I mean.
Time period, we also had X-Men versus Fantastic Four, X-Men versus Avengers.
We did, and we also had X-Men Teen Titans.
Yes, we did.
Which was kind of like the first real X-Men comic that I bought, because
Really?
I was a Teen Titans fan. I read Teen Titans off of the spinner rack. That's kind of what one of the first superhero books I ever read was Teen Titans, and it still has a very personal part of my heart.
Yeah.
And my favorite artist worked on Teen Titans forever, George Perez, the genius, and worked on everything. But I mean, just particularly, I just always thought Teen Titans was really just a great book, and it was a great concept, and I liked the heroes, liked the visual look of a lot of the characters, and but it was a very easy book to get into because you didn't have, and I think that's some of the issue that DC suffers from, and because every so often they just restart everything, which is now even more prevalent, but when we were growing up, it wasn't as prevalent. DC's biggest problem that they have is they constantly fight against 70 years of history.
Yes.
And it's hard as a new reader to jump in to a book, whichever one you want, pick one, I don't care, any of the DC books that have longevity like Batman, Superman, Green Lantern, what have you, Wonder Woman. They have oodles of history that just go on and on and on and on forever. It's like, how many people know that for a while Wonder Woman didn't have powers? They depowered her in the 70s. There's probably people out there who say, what are you talking about? Well, no, that happened. You know what I mean?
I wouldn't know that.
Well, but but this is the history. You know what I mean? How many people have worn the Flash mask? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How many people have worn the Batman mask? You know what I mean? And the only, these characters just have such longevity, and it's not saying that's bad. That's actually a testament to their characters. I think that's awesome. But then you get to Marvel, and Cap, of course, has 70, 80 years of history. Not all under Marvel, but
Correct.
But I always feel like, if you're going to compare the two, I always feel that Marvel characters as a whole are far more relatable
Yes.
than the DC characters. I can relate with a teenager who gets bitten by a spider, not that part at least, and I can understand a teenager trying to deal with being a teenager, plus this incredible responsibility of being a hero, and still have everything that teenagers have to deal with, which was the early part of Spider-Man. Which girl do I like? Do I want to go out with this one? Why is Flash Thompson a dick? Why, all these other issues that were around Spider-Man. It's a very relatable character. Then you get Batman. Now Batman's cool. I think we both agree with
He's
what I mean.
Cool, yeah.
He's a very cool character. He's just the dark and brooding. But is he really relatable?
Absolutely
you know what I mean?
not.
Is he a relatable character? How do you put it yourself in the mindset of a billionaire whose parents were murdered and has a psychosis for all intents and purposes?
Traveled the world,
right? And learn. It's a very hard to relate character.
It is,
and I think that's what really separates them at their root. If that makes any the two titans of industry.
Oh yes,
that is their everything that Stan and Ditko, and God rest his soul, by the way.
Yes.
Everything that they came up with always had such a human element in those early years. Even the sense of family in Fantastic Four, which is completely lost now. But
it might be coming.
Well, it might. We hope. We hope. But all these great characters, all these relatable characters, were just had an air of humanity to them, where I don't always felt that way in DC.
No. And also Stan Lee's motto for the writer's room, the bullpen, was every comic is somebody's first comic. And it was handled that way for a great many years, where you had a small recap, if not even just a splash page of, hey, it's Peter Parker, this happened to him, this is how old he is, this is what's on his mind right now.
Editor's note.
Yes, and the editor's note. That actually drove me to
buy other comics.
That
absolutely. I totally agree with that. But if you look at the 70s, I think Marvel had a great run with all those horror books that they put out, with the Blade and the Morbius, the Living Vampire, Man Thing, Werewolf by Night, all those
Howard the Duck, even.
Howard the Duck, all those great characters. Okay, and then you get into the 80s with the Defenders and Alpha Flight and the emergence of X-Men. See, here's the thing: in the 80s, the X-Men weren't really popular, and except for a couple
some of their
people.
best work was handled in the late 70s, early 80s.
By John Byrne.
Yes, and Chris Claremont.
Yes, indeed.
But those,
yes, indeed.
But those get kind of lumped into after the fact. You discover those. Not to take anything away from the diehard fans that were reading it at the time.
Keep in mind, most of the 60s, late 60s, and into the 70s, the X-Men were in reprints.
Yes.
It wasn't
which is
until
surprising.
Right, which wasn't until 95, which was after Giant Size X-Men 1, is when we got new stories, and it's more or less what we got to be the typical X-Men cast of characters. It was, and even that changed in the 80s because the major X-Men, the original X-Men, left and started another book, X Factor, which I was a huge fan of.
Oh yeah,
I loved
X Factor is a
great book.
Yeah.
But the 80s, DC did something that was really kind of like unheard of. And in the 80s, the comic industry, because I was alive then, and I always felt kind of like, well, this more than anybody, the persecution of being a dork in the 80s.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
But I liked the fact that DC took a harder edge than Marvel did. Took a lot longer for Marvel to come around to that. Because in the 80s, DC puts out Dark Knight Returns.
Yes.
Watchmen.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Basically starts the groundwork which becomes Vertigo.
Yes.
Okay. And there's all these adult themes that ran. V for Vendetta reprinted from the British comic, over here by DC.
Yes.
But it was just this, and then they do this incredible crossover called Crisis. And I really didn't understand at the time that I was reading it what the impact really was, because it is such...
Because we didn't know the history
we didn't.
much.
We really didn't. And I came to Crisis very late in Crisis's run, because it ran forever, and it ran through every effing book in DC.
Yes.
But they really did try to clean house.
Yeah.
And I think it made it a little bit more approachable for the younger reader.
Because then didn't you have like Burns, Superman, and
And the
then
funny
Wonder
thing,
Woman?
the funny thing is, if you remember reading DC Comics in that early '80s period when Byrne left Marvel and went to DC, that was like the first time of a rock star artist. If that makes, I mean, we take that for granted
Yeah.
now because you have the Todd McFarlanes of the world, the Rob Liefeld, all these quote unquote bigger, larger than life type artists. But DC ran ads in their comics basically saying, we got him.
Yeah.
And it was John Byrne. You know what I mean? It was just like an incredible, I mean, it was like the first time like really realizing that this guy is, you know, important, whatever you want to, you know what I mean? It was kind of a big deal, but I would say that the first part of the 80s DC was king, and I would say the second part of the 80s Marvel was king. And I don't know I don't know where you draw the line in the sand on that. Does that make sense?
To where I start, my first comics were DC comics that I said they were kind of given to me. They were my uncles and my grandmother gave them to me, and they were Black Hawk, some old Flash, things of that nature. So that's what
Good stuff.
that's what I first read, the old 60s comics. I mean, to the point where I knew that logo that I was picking up Atari Force just because it's DC.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And
I was
Atari, you know, that was in the name.
Yeah, exactly.
But
and I love that.
And also, one of my favorites, still to this day, was a Batman Brave and the Bold with Etrigan. That comic disturbed me. And that's how the late 70s DC started that walking on the edge. Like, it was Batman. I knew who Batman was, you know, Adam West. But then when you have Etrigan thrown in, and magic and illusions, and I remember some dude got a 100 fish hooks in the chest, and I'm just like, oh, what is going on here? But anyway, I don't necessarily know where I fell into Marvel. It could have been G.I. Joe. It could have been Transformers. It could have been Ewoks. You know, it could have been, you know, but that's when it was like, okay, this is my company. I like it. But like you said, where DC started heavy in the 80s and then Marvel was in the later 80s better, I flip-flopped.
Okay.
Where by 89, I was reading Green Arrow.
Okay.
The Vertigo titles. You know, where, because I think when you're in middle school or high school by 89, you know, that's where it's like, I'm an adult now. You know, I'm reading comics that's got nudity and cuss words in it.
Well, make no bones about it. When I say I was reading Marvel, what I mean by that is I'm reading predominantly Marvel.
Right.
So even in, I'll use 89 as your base, you know, I was reading probably the X books. Mm-hmm. I think Wolverine had just gotten his first solo title right around that time frame. Yes. Okay, I was reading that. I was hanging in there with Alpha Flight.
Same here.
You know what I mean? And I was reading, oh Lord, going back in time. Probably a couple other Marvel books if I sat here and thought about it.
But like the thing with Marvel,
but at the same time, I was reading Doom Patrol.
Right, but in our comic book store history is vastly different between us. But it's like the Marvel books I was reading, I could pick up at any spinner rack or the card and book store
that
was up at the shopping center.
They were definitely more approachable.
But when I was able to get to a dingy, dark comic book store, it's like, ooh, you know, this is the only place I can pick these up, you know.
And growing up where we grew up, and we grew up in the Mid-Atlantic in the Maryland, D.C. area, there was a mecca shop in a little area called Security. Mm-hmm. And this was the Jeppy's Comic World. And this thing was immense. And I'm sure it was actually smaller than what I remember it because I was smaller. But it just seemed like it went on forever. And it was like every back issue in the world was there. And, you know, but this was, I remember like going to Toys R Us, for lack of a better experience, you know what I mean? Walking in there in 88 or 89 or whatever year it was, you know, and being completely, I don't think I've seen that many comics in one space in my life.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then, of course, there was the place that I grew up in, essentially, a little place called Cards, Comics, and Collectibles. It was a hole-in-the-wall store in the middle of Reisterstown, in the antique side of it. It was a little small town.
Yeah.
And this place was no bigger than this basement. At least that's what my memory
agree.
Dictates. And I actually stuck with them through 3 locations, excuse me. And it was an education. But what it did for me was expose me to every comic. So here's Eclipse titles over here. It's Marvel over there. It's DC here. It's continuity. You know what I mean? It's Comico.
Yeah.
All these incredible books. And the thing is you forget about them, and then you get some money in your pocket, and you're thinking, man, I wonder if I can find X, Y, or Z. And you go to a comic store or a convention, and you find them all in the dollar bins.
Yeah.
That's kind of and then you spend half of your life looking for Armor #2 from Comico or Continuity or whoever it was. I can't even remember, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, that
But
was continuity.
continuity,
Yeah.
I think it was. But that's the thing. All of these, Marvel and DC are your cigarettes and your alcohol, your gateway drug, and then you go from there.
Yeah.
So that's the one thing I'll give both of them. But to say which one's better, I don't think that's fair.
It's not. Funny little side story. Well, funny to me anyway. That I've only was at Geppi's once in my entire life before it was gone, and being the poor child that I was, I only had enough for one comic. That one comic that I bought, that I thought I'd never find anywhere else ever in my
lay it
entire
on
life. UK Captain Britain,
Really?
the old magazine size
Yes.
black and whites. Because still to this day, Excalibur, Captain
That was
Britain.
absolutely.
That-
Well, Nightcrawler.
and Nightcrawler.
But
yeah.
I'm saying them
And
Nightcrawlers.
Phoenix and Shadowcat.
Right.
Yeah.
Rachel Summers Phoenix, not
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, and here's what I'll say to kind of maybe summarize this, and to some extent, they're both fun. They both made me the person I am today, along with a shit ton of Disney comics.
Yeah.
But I think the best way to describe it, and I've said it before on this channel, if something happens to a DC character, you're upset, you're mad, why'd they do that, okay? Why'd you break Batman's back? Why'd you kill Superman? Why'd you make Green Lantern go crazy?
Yeah.
Whatever it is, okay? But you motherfuckers took adamantium from Wolverine. I wish you had cheated on my girlfriend instead, okay? It was like, that hurt. That really bothered me. You killed Adam Warlock, okay? You ripped Silver Surfer's skin off. Shit like that pisses me off, as you can tell. That's the difference. That is the difference. I
Because
always
of that
say
human
that.
connection
Yes.
to it. And I think I said it in my little retrospect on Wolverine, where I said, that's not our Wolverine.
No, it's not.
After the adamantium and the
Debacle of Bone
origins
Claws
and all that,
Yep.
our Wolverine was done.
No,
but
was. Yeah.
he was like that awesome uncle that would show up. Maybe
Yeah,
give you a
and give
sip
you a
of his
cigar.
beer
Yeah.
or something.
You want to take it?
Yeah.
Here's my Philly cheerio.
That
You know what I
his
mean?
heart is huge, but he's very rough around the edges.
We read comics and
So,
we knew
yes,
the
that
cigars
hurt.
that he smoked.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That would be unheard of now. You know what I mean? We knew it, It wasn't Joe Camel that made me smoke. It was Wolverine. Shh, shh, shh. Sorry. I shouldn't have said that out loud. But even Wolverine's downtime, he looked like the Marlboro Man.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He had the cowboy hat, the flannel shirt, the whole 9 yards.
Or
You know
even
what I mean?
just a, wife beater.
Right, whatever it was. But he always looked like the blue collar hero at the end of the day. He looked like he just came off a construction site, or what have you. A lot of the Marvel characters have that approachability.
Yes.
Even when 9/11 happened, okay? And I think this is one of the greatest books I've ever read. There was a Captain America comic that came out.
Okay.
And the thing is they show Steve Rogers, not Captain, in the rubble, saving people from the towers. And I think that's what speaks so incredibly powerful about Marvel as opposed to DC. It wasn't Captain America doing it. It was Steve Rogers doing it.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And I think that's the perk of Marvel always being set in the real world, where DC is in Metropolis and the Gothams. And,
Yes.
You know what I mean? I think there's these little differences. So if you ask me point blank, if you told me a gun to my head, yeah, I probably prefer Marvel.
I agree.
You know?
I agree. And getting back to the real world thing, New York was a character
In and of itself.
Yes.
In and of itself.
And that was a beautiful thing.
Avengers Tower, or Avengers Mansion. Where's that?
In New York.
Right. Where's Baxter Building?
New York.
Where's Four Freedoms Plaza?
New York.
Okay?
X-Men, upstate New York.
Where's the Daily Bugle?
New York.
I mean, it is the quintessential backdrop for Marvel.
And that's great because those writers, those artists walked outside of their office and it was
their
right
inspiration
there.
was right in front of them. And I think that's some of it. It's that real world connection, and that's what's always kind of, you know, Obama becomes president. Who visits him?
I don't know.
Spider-Man.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Nice.
Okay. What was one of the more famous books in the last couple of years, you know what I mean? The realism side of it that always seems to grab you, you know what I mean, with Marvel. That's not saying that if you told me there's just this awesome, you know, fourth world comic coming out that I would not read it. You know what I mean? Or I would not love it. Or, you know, if you told me George Perez is going to do another run on Teen Titans, well, I'm right, you know. It's not that exclusivity, but if you told me what would you have to read one for the rest of your life, it would probably be Marvel. My favorite characters are Marvel. You know, the obscure, and I say this now because they were obscure. Now they're not. But my favorite characters were Silver Surfer growing up, and Adam Warlock, and Star-Lord, and Rocket Raccoon, and Thanos. Thanos is my all-time favorite character. All-time favorite. You know, all of those galactic characters, the Shi'ar, the Guardians, you know, all those guys.
Starjammers.
Starjammers. Yeah, I read all that stuff. I loved all that stuff. You know, probably read that more than I did anything else. It was the galactic side of Marvel. You know what I mean? So, I don't know if this helps anybody, but this is our opinion, you know.
And it's fun. It's fun. We don't get to talk about comics that much anymore unless it's with the backdrop of a movie or a TV show or, you know, so.
All of our subscribers out there, any guys that are under 40, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, if you're under 40, go out and read Infinity Gauntlet. Go out and read Thanos' Quest. Go out and read the Demon Bear Saga. Go out and read
Dark Phoenix
Saga. Go out and read
Asgardian Wars.
The Asgardian War. You know, these were some great stories and so many foundations of what you guys watch in the movies, things like that. They're all there, okay?
Yeah.
You know, they're all right there. Go out and read Crisis on Infinite Earths. Go out and read, and buy the collected. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Go out and read Watchmen. Go out and read Batman Returns. Go out and read Death in the Family. These are all great books that we grew up with. You know what I mean?
My personal favorite, Green Arrow, The Longbow Hunters.
Another one. It's a fantastic story.
Because the one thing about Green Arrow,
stories.
why I migrated to him, he was a real dude. And they removed him from Star City and put him in Seattle. I think that was probably one of the
smartest things that they did.
Yes,
I agree.
but that was one of the first times they're like, well, let's remove him from this alternate reality America and put him in a real city.
And the reason why Green Arrow jumps out at us more probably than some is he is a relatable character.
Yeah, and that was his point. I think the Justice League animated show summed it up the best when they were hounding him to join, where it's like Batman was like, you're our conscience. You're the real person here. It's not me. I'm so far gone that, you know, I'm a monster, but you're a real dude that can point us in the right direction.
Read those books. We went through a whole list of them. Green Longbow Hunters is one of the best books ever made, and it's one of the prettiest.
Yes, Mike
McGraw is great work. But read those books from the 80s if you guys are comic fans. And most of the stuff that we just listed off is all graphic novels now. They're all collected.
That's the way of the world.
There's actually a really cool run if you want to read what happens before you get to Thanos' Quest and Infinity War or Infinity Gauntlet. There's a collected Silver Surfer, and it's the story of how basically Thanos coming back and all his steps and going into the well and realizing that he should put the Infinity Gauntlet together. It's a neat little book. It's a Silver Surfer collected. It's like 36 through 44 or something like that. Just a neat story. But these are all the stories we're talking about. This is what we grew up with. This was just fun stuff, read them. And you can get a new appreciation for your characters that you love now or that you watch on the big screen. There's just these great stories out there.
Yes. Anyway, that was just our little soapbox. Unfortunately, like we said, it probably didn't help because we love both equally, but
We have a preference.
we do have a preference. But does that make it the end-all be-all?
No.
Definitely not.
And like anything, what's your input? You know,
Yeah.
and like we said, we don't want to talk about the movies. We all know our feelings here. We've made that abundantly clear over time. Tell us about the comics you're reading now. Tell us about the comics that we may have missed. Tell us about the stuff you think we should read. You know?
How about this? In the comments, hit us up. If you were to approach someone that's never read a comic before, what is the one book that you would ask them to read?
Good call.
To indoctrinate them into this dork world that us comic geeks live in. What's the one book?
Tell us, because you know what, we'll buy it, or he'll buy it, I'll buy it, we'll share it, we'll read it. What do you think? And we'll come back here and talk about that.
Yes.
You know what I mean? We want your input. We really
even
do.
tell us what we should be reading. Maybe we'll take a chance.
Please tell us what we should be reading, because I'm kind of looking for something to read.
Yeah, it's been about 12 years since I've actually read a comic, and I feel pretty damn bad about that.
The last book I read was The Last Lock and Key.
Probably the collected you gave me for Christmas one year. That and a Fables one shot on Big Bad Wolf was one of the ones I've read.
That's good stuff right there.
Yeah.
But or anything Dan Bird. That's not fair. Dan Bird puts out something and I buy that.
He needs to put out stuff more often.
Yeah. So, anyway,
thanks for watching. Keep being rad.
keep reading.
And keep reading.
Stay dorky.
Stay dorky, and come on, just let us know some comics. We'll get back to you.
Yeah, input.
Yeah. Let's have some fun. Talk to you later. Peace out. Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked what you saw, hit the subscribe button for some more awesome videos. We also have a couple here on the side you might be interested in. And until next time, thanks for watching, keep being rad, and stay dorky.